Okay, everyone. 181 light show. Some stuff we don't even know if we're going to cover. Before we get started, I want to address a couple of issues. Issue number one. Yes, I would love to publish these shows as one part, rather than, as some people have quote unquote put it, spam the subscriber channels with multiple 10 to 15 minute parts. That's YouTube, not me, people. YouTube says they must be that short. And I say I'm not going to not do content just because YouTube isn't happy. Please write care of, what's Google's address? Google, what's one way?
Google at gmail.com.
Yeah, it's like, look up Google, write angry letters. It's like, whatever.
They think that they were going to increase it, but it's going to be gradual.
Well, it's like, here's what they really need to do. Here's the thing YouTube needs to do on that. Because the problem is, and you know, The Onion made fun of this perfectly. In fact, I think if you go into YouTube and search good YouTube video, that Onion spoof news thing is still the first thing that comes up. It's still the number one result. We're like, can anybody make a good YouTube video? Because all the limits and the other things, and it's like, we're trying to do a show here. And this type of content is strongly discouraged on YouTube. It's because of the way the system's set up. They need to create. I'm not a multi-million or billion-dollar company that wants to give Google obscene amount of money to sell my product, and I'm not making videos of my dog farting. You know, that in between. I want to produce content. I have no idea how big the audience is going to be. It's like, now, granted, there's a whole bunch of services trying to do that. You know, Ustream, Stickcam, and a handful of others. You know, there's a few dozen live streaming service and other things like that. The reason we're not using those right now is because I'm using too much of my bandwidth to pipe these two people in to help in, and we'd have lagging problems if I was also live streaming up at the same time. To my knowledge, none of those really work good with I just want to upload this. And let's face it, if you're doing video nobody's heard of, if you want people to find it, you dump it on YouTube, even if it's not the best place to dump it. Or do y'all think I'm completely lost my knocker on that? And
YouTube is definitely the best place to get discovered as far as video content goes.
I take it you don't really have anything to say on that, James?
No, I'm reading the 5 things Google needs to still needs to fix Android, because I'm assuming we're going to get into that.
Yeah, we're going to get into that here. I kind of laughed at that, to be quite honest. And some of this is true, some of it was just complaining. I guess we'll start with that since James brought that up. That was a little weird, actually. It's the first one. Let me see. What was the first point they said? Push for more consistent. You know, this is a two-edged sword, and I'm on the one hand, yeah, it'd be nice if the Android UI and everything was consistent from device to device to device. But you know, that's the Windows and iPhone mentality. That everybody is exactly the same, and everybody likes to do it this way. And believe me, I get their point, and part of me wants to go, you know, I really agree. That's something Android should do. And then there's the other part of me, that's the Linux user part of me, that goes, you know, even though it's Google's version of Linux, or Linux Mobile, it's still open source, it's still Linux. And I know this is a problem in Linux, that as you move from distro to distro to distro, some things just get done a little bit different. But each distro is a different OS based on a Linux core. And I actually think that's one of Linux's greatest strengths, even though a lot of anti-Linux people say, well, all Linux systems should be exactly the same. And I'm going to say, even though I think initially it's going to create some rough hurdles for Android, in the long run, I think the end users are going to win because no matter how you think it should be done, odds are some manufacturer out there is going to build an Android device that does it the way you think it should be done. Or do y'all think I'm a little off there?
This is as far as the different UIs across Android devices.
Yeah, so because one of their things is we need more consistency. You know, we need to sign with the way.
No, I don't think so. I think that I mean, I do think that there shouldn't. Here's the thing. I think that Linux wins when there's different ones like KDE and GNOME. Well, let's talk about. I'm gonna get into a distro metaphor. When we have Ubuntu, when we have Fedora, and when we have OpenSUSE, Linux wins from having all those because it's choice. Some people will like this, some people will like this. That's good. However, when we have hundreds of distros based off other distros that don't really do anything more than other distros, that hurts Linux. So for Android, as long as there's a few different UIs, that's definitely going to help Android. But if it comes to each manufacturer making each phone have a different UI, that will absolutely hurt Android a huge amount. There needs to be
Well, and that's one of the things that Google's actually nipping in the bud right now to start with. It's the way the Android tree is developing now is that the UI is now a separate branch, and that the individual manufacturers can go as nuts as they want, and it doesn't affect the core Android UI, which will allow for updates to be consistently pushed through, rather than this, okay, you have to completely retweak your new UI for this new update and everything else. So it's building the steady core on which to build on and just go forward from there. So you can have Sense UI and whatever Samsung's UI is and whatever Moto Blur, which I hate, but I'm sure there's some 14-year-old kid out there who just think Moto Blur is the best thing since sliced bread.
Undoubtedly. As far as I'm concerned, all these different UIs are a good thing, the kind of thing that.
Well, no, but like the point James is making is also why
he has a good point.
That's why I'm split here. I'm honestly split. I'm like, on the one hand, it's providing choice to the end user, which is always a good thing. On the other hand, there's the other side.
Well, here's the thing. Just have moderation. I mean, obviously these can't really be enforced that much, but
that's the thing. It's the whole idea behind open and let the end user and let the manufacturers and everyone else get in touch.
I mean, like, you anything's bad if you have a law. But what I mean is that I do think that, like, a lot of people say there should be one Android UI. I don't agree with that. However, I don't agree that everyone should be able to, not be able to, but that everyone should make their different UI. In the end, that will hurt Android. But I do believe that if there's maybe, I would say up to 5 different main UIs.
I could say you can even get up to 10. But what the rule of thumb should be, and this is a general rule of thumb in Linux too, although everybody doesn't follow it, but these are distros that have less than 1/100% of the total Linux market, because it's like you're saying, there's no reason for a Hannah Montana Linux distro. There just isn't. That's better served by a theme. And I actually think that distro is based on Mint, if I remember correctly, or something like that. But at the end of the day, you should only go out and create a new UI or create additional splintering if you're solving a problem that cannot be solved by other means.
I'm sorry if this makes you sad, but Hannah Montana in Linux has been depreciated.
Oh, thank the gods! All praise the tux. But that distro never should have existed in the first place. That should have been a GNOME or a KDE theme. That's what that should have been. There was no reason.
But if what you're telling me is right, basically what Google's doing is they're making it so that Moto Blur and HD Citizens will basically become themes on top of Android, right?
They're not going to be strictly purely themes, but they're going to be a separate modularized tree, which means the way in which they hook into Android is independent of the work done over there. So for all intents and purposes, they're a theme, even though they are a UI. But
work the same way across. Yeah.
Right. So there'll be a centralized hook for that UI to hook into. So if Android updates, as long as that hook isn't changed, the UI doesn't need to. It will need to take advantage of new features that just didn't exist at all before. But that's a different thing entirely. That's.
Okay, I would like it if the UI was removable without having to do crazy stuff with your phone.
Now, what you're getting into there is something I personally agree with, and that's all these Android devices should ship with the first time you boot them up, you not only put in a Google account or a Moto Blur account, but you also put in a root account. So you're in charge of the device. It's your device, not theirs.
I don't necessarily agree with that. Not everyone deserves to have root privileges on their device. Not deserve, but not everyone is really safe with that kind of stuff. But I do believe that you should be able to choose as much as possible, including UI, including removing apps remotely, including all of that. Maybe not have total root access. They shouldn't put it necessarily at startup, because that's a little bit too easy for people, and people will do it when they don't know what it is just because it's an extra thing. They should kind of have it in settings where you have to look a bit to find it, then you could turn it on if you want to make rooting your phone that easy. I don't think that it should just be pop-up, hey, you want to root your phone? Sure.
Okay, yeah, healthy compromise there, because the people who care about that will go look for that feature, the other people won't.
Because I believe that not everyone can really hold the responsibility of having root.
Yeah, most people take the name of root in vain.
Oh, exactly.
But see, what you're getting into there is the carriers don't want the end user making decisions about their device.
Mm-hmm.
That's related to something else we're probably going to wind up going into now, but it's kind of, we want to be in charge. They want to figure out how to make us pay for something that's free. And when you start giving the end users in charge of stuff, they're never going to pay for stuff that's free. They're just not going to do it anymore. It's the whole business model of the cell phone industry is, how do I get someone to pay me an administrative fee for something they can already do? And that's just such a fun game in which we...
a lot of these 5 things Google needs to fix about Android, what it reminded me of is paper cuts, right? And I think, the 100 paper cuts project for Ubuntu.
Right.
And I think that that's great. And I think that more things should adopt that, including Android, because stuff like spell check.
Well, no, that's the other thing. Like reorganize the Android market. This is a feature that actually, I love Android, but it annoys the hell out of me that this feature is not built into the Android OS in some way, because anyone who's ever used a Linux distro, spell check is built into almost everything in Linux because of there's open source spell check and the way the OS. If there's a text box on your screen and you're on a Linux desktop, there is spell check functionality with very few exceptions. And the fact that there is not built-in spell check in Android, it's kind of an insult to the end user at this point. I realize what Google's trying to push for is, rather than type anything, you speak to the phone. I know that's what they're trying to speak for. But there's still sometimes I want to type it.
That there was no spell check because of that feature.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. And if you're using that feature, you don't need spell check because the voice automation will get it right, assuming it can recognize you. But for those of us who don't want to do it that way, spell check should be there.
Yeah, absolutely should. And I'm sure there are a lot of minor things that really should be fixed. Yeah.
Okay.
That should be covered up before too long, and these kind of UI concerns are going to be one of their major focuses in in gingerbread